Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
I have a great follow-up question to United America. And I want to mention three things. I'll be brief, it won't be a speech, but they're relevant to my question. The first involves the events in Rowan County, Kentucky, surrounding the county clerk, Kim Davis. Number two is the fact that religious institutions have exemptions from certain provisions under the Affordable Care Act. Number three is in the state of Florida, religious institutions which provide child care services are exempt from certain provisions regarding health and safety and sanitation that non-religious institutions have to adhere to. So my question is, do you believe that religious individuals and institutions should have to follow the same laws that non-religious individuals and institutions have to follow? Or is it okay to make an exception to the law based on religion?
Well, first of all, of course everyone has to follow the laws, but
I'm very glad that Senator Rubio believes that everybody should have to follow the laws, but that wasn't the question. The question was not whether everybody should have to follow the laws. The question was whether religious and non-religious alike should have to follow the same laws.
But there should never be any law that forces you to personally violate your conscience. There's a difference between...
What if, as county clerk, it violates my conscience to allow a black person to register to vote, or to allow a woman to register to vote? What if, as county clerk, it violates my conscience to allow a black person to marry a white person, or to allow a Catholic to marry a Protestant, or to allow a divorcee to get married at all? What if it violates my conscience to pay taxes? And I can't help but wonder what Senator Rubio's reaction would be if President Obama were to refuse to comply with a court order that he carry out his duties as a public official because it violated his conscience.
So you talk about the case of the clerk in Kentucky. She had what she said was a personal objection to signing that. The law should not have forced her to sign it. Someone else in the office, now, that doesn't mean the office doesn't have to do it. You still have to follow the law, but she personally should not have been forced to do it.
On point of fact, she had forbidden all of her subordinates to issue marriage licenses to people who wanted to have same-sex marriages. But what if she were the only person in the office? Or what if everybody in the office held the same conscientious objection? That would cause undue hardship for a certain segment of the population.
No member of the clergy should be told, listen, you either perform the same-sex marriage, or we're going to fine you, or we're going to take away your IRS exemption. No one should be personally forced to violate their conscience. Religious organizations that have a wealth,
I agree that no member of the clergy should be forced to carry out same-sex marriages. A member of the clergy is a private individual. Of course, that has nothing to do with the question. But if you support tax-exempt status for clergymen, then by implication it does mean that you support one set of laws for the religious and another set of laws for the non-religious.
That have a wealth, a Christian school. A Christian school, I'll give you an example. Most Christian schools in America teach that any relations between two people that are not husband and wife married are wrong. That's why they don't hire people that are cohabitating with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. Should the law force them to say, no, you must hire everyone and not take that into account? That undermines the very basis of their school. If you don't like it, don't go to that school. It's a private school run by an organization.
I'm actually not going to offer an opinion on whether a private organization can engage in hiring practices that discriminate against people who do not live up to their standards in their personal lives. That would be a subject for another video, and it would probably be a long video. But he's answering questions that I didn't ask.
So of course everyone should follow the law, but you have to have a well-founded, if there is an exception, it has to be on a well-founded conscious objection. And it can't just be, we don't want to follow the sanitation rules because that violates my faith. For the most part, maybe there is some religious exception that would lead to that, but for the most part, that's not the kind of cases that we're seeing. The kind of cases that we're seeing are individuals that hold a deeply held belief that don't want to be personally forced to violate the law. They don't want to be personally forced to have to do it, to violate their conscience or be in violation of the law.
Who gets to decide what is a well-founded exception and what is not? I would argue that any reasoning that is based on faith-based beliefs is not a well-founded exception. On the other hand, an exception that is based on the reasoned use of evidence might be a well-founded exception. But who would get to decide that? It really comes down to whether we want to have a rule of law or not, or whether we want to have one set of laws for religious people and another set of laws for non-religious people, or different sets of laws for different religions. Now, since we're talking about Kim Davis, apparently, she was not forced to violate her conscience. She could have resigned her position, and then she can practice whatever religion she likes as a private citizen. But if a private school is allowed to fire somebody for what that employee is doing in their personal life, then why should Kim Davis be allowed to keep her position when she's refusing to perform her duties for any reason whatsoever, religious, conscientious, or otherwise?
And so that's what religious liberty is, because we need to understand religious liberty is not the right just to believe whatever you want. It is the right to live out your faith in every aspect of your life.
Religious liberty does not mean that you have the right to violate other people's rights. And according to the Supreme Court, that's exactly what she was doing.
And here's where I think the silliness comes into this and the danger. They act as if society is somehow not able to accommodate it. So like we need government to help us out because we can't figure it out on our own. That's absurd. We can figure this out on our own. People do this all the time in their lives. They do it all the time. So in the end, you know, the example everybody uses is the florist or the baker. I don't know of any bakery or florist that's going to say, we don't serve gay people. We don't serve cookies. We don't sell flowers to anyone that was gay. That's absurd. That doesn't happen. And if it does, you know, it's a rarity. But they will say, look, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. I don't want to participate in a ceremony, in a particular ceremony that violates my conscience. I think they have a right to be able to say that.
And as private individuals, of course, they do have the right to say that. But the principle that is relevant in this instance is the idea that once you open up a business to the public, you must be willing to render whatever services you offer to everybody and to comply with whatever laws exist about discrimination. If I have a bakery, I could just as easily argue that it violates my conscience to serve the baked goods at a wedding for black people or a divorcee.
It's not they just don't want to participate in a ceremony. They're not discriminating against a whole class of people. They just don't want to participate in an event that violates their conscience.
The fact that it violates someone's conscience to provide any services for any same-sex wedding does indeed mean that they are discriminating against an entire class of people. This actually raises an interesting hypothetical which I won't be able to respond to fully in this video. I do believe in freedom of association, but it must be recognized that the right to freedom of association will come in conflict with the rights of other people not to be discriminated against. And in a practical sense, what would happen if a same-sex couple sought to get married in a very small town, which happens to be overwhelmingly Christian and overwhelmingly opposed to gay marriage? They would have to endure hardship to find a bakery which may be at some distance, which is willing to serve cupcakes at their wedding.
And I think the society is able to work that out. It's not like we have a shortage of flower shops or a shortage of bakeries. And so, in the end, I think that society is fully capable of working through some of these issues without there being a regulation, a law, or a presidential speech. I mean, everything is not going to work out. If you go to, I'm a Christian, if you go to, I know most Christians would tell you, by the way, refusing to serve food to someone because of their gender identity, their sexual preference is immoral. One thing is to say, I'm not going to participate in an event. Another thing is to say, I refuse to serve or interact with you. That also violates your conscience to do that. But I think society is capable of regulating that in our personal interactions. We don't need a law or a government program for every issue in our society. And so I think we need to get back to that conversation.
Several points to make. I didn't ask about same-sex marriage, but Rubio spent most of the time of his response talking about same-sex marriage, and that is suggestive of their motivations. I can only speculate. But what this really seems to be all about is the opposition to same-sex marriage, not about some lofty principle about violating conscience, because as I've demonstrated, that really is absurd. And I do agree with him to an extent that where society can work things out on its own, then we don't need laws or presidential speeches. But when millions of homosexuals were being discriminated against for no rational reason, we needed some laws to rectify that. And if we rule out the idea of religious exceptions or accommodations or exemptions or whatever you want to call them, then we will be getting by with fewer and simpler laws. Laws which treat everybody equally. Well, if you listened this far, I want to thank you for listening this far. Please keep it respectful in the comments section. And later, you can find links to Rubio's unedited response, and you can find a link to a question which I asked of Senator Cruz that very same day, in which I unfortunately misrepresented Rubio's views. I also will have a video of my commentary to Cruz's response.